Hello friend, this is Ryan Hicks at TaughtToProfit.com, and today I want to talk to you about, is your house an asset? Now, for many people, the immediate response will be no, because they read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I'm going to leave a link in the description to Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If you haven't read it, most people have, but if you haven't or you haven't read it in a while, it is worth reading because it is a different mentality toward money, a better mentality than your average person has. But a lot of the stuff mentioned in there are truisms, meaning they are true generically, but if you have any kind of financial wisdom, some of those things may not actually be true. For example, a house not being an asset. Now, the traditional thing that people argue is, well, a house is an asset because anything that's not producing income is thus not an asset because it's taking money away from you. It's kind of a little misleading because let's say you buy a house for $100,000. I'm just using a round number. Doesn't matter the exact amount actually, just for discussion, $100,000. And let's say you're paying $1,000 a month mortgage. It may be more or less depending on interest rates and all this stuff, but let's just say for the example, $1,000 a month. Now, how much in total expenses and upkeep for that house are you going to have every year? It's amazing to hear some people, because they are married to an idea that a house is just this big liability draining money from you every second of the day. And so they act like it's almost like, have you seen infomercials where their product is solving some problem, but it's not really a major problem, and then they show like scrubbing a stain or something, but they make it like the most laborious and ridiculously hard thing to do when really it's not a big deal. That's kind of the way this gets talked up, where the house is this awful liability draining money from you. And certainly in some cases that is true. In many cases that's true, because many people are not buying wisely. They're not going into buying this major purchase of a house in a wise manner. But that's a different issue. If your house was $100,000, you're paying $1,000 a month. The exact cost of your upkeep, who knows? But for most people, I've lived in a bunch of houses over the years, it's not a tremendous amount of money. People like to imagine you have a pipe busting every day and you're having to replace air conditioners every year and all this stuff that never happens. It just doesn't. If you're having those kind of problems happen, you probably didn't buy wisely in the first place. And you can have those same things happening under rental. And you may say, well, but I wouldn't have to fix them. But you may have to wait. You might have to wait a week to get your air conditioner fixed. If you live in a place like I do in Texas, you cannot go a week without air conditioning in the summer. You will melt. And people actually die. There are elderly people who are trying to conserve their electric bill, die during the summer. It happens every single summer. The summer heat starts getting higher, and these people are not turning their air conditioning on because they're trying to save money, unfortunately. And they literally, essentially boil in their house to death. So that happens. So rental is not always the big solution, this easy, no risk, no liability solution to housing. But let's consider if you were renting. If you're renting that same house and the mortgage is $1,000 a month, you're probably paying anywhere between $1,200, $1,300, maybe more a month in rental. So you're paying an extra $200 or $300 a month in rental. That's going to be about normal, probably anywhere from 15 to 30% more than a mortgage would cost is going to be your rental cost. You might find some exceptions to that, but many times that's going to be the reality. Because people renting don't want to lose money, and they don't want to be below market price. If they are below market price, there might be something wrong with that neighborhood, and you might need to really check. Or there might be something wrong with the house. Just because you have a rental and you think, whoa, the landlord has to fix all these problems, that doesn't mean they will. You don't even know if in fact they will actually fix problems if they come up. And they probably will, but who knows? There's a lot of liabilities there in renting as well. But renting can be very wise, especially if you're going to be in an area for only a few years. Renting is going to be very, very wise, because to buy a house, get a mortgage, put a down payment down, and hope the market goes up and doesn't go down so you don't lose value in the house as you're paying this mortgage, where the first few years nothing's going to principal just about. At the end of that few years, you're at a net zero gain in equity probably, because you haven't been paying any principal down. and it might be difficult to sell the house. So then you have more time you have to pay as you already moved somewhere else, and you're having to pay a mortgage on a house that you're trying to sell. That's not very wise. Renting in that situation is the best move, because if you know you're going to be there for a short period of time, renting is going to be smarter than buying a house, obviously. Now, if you're going to rent in an area you plan on being for 5-10 years, then you need to get some online calculators and start calculating this out, because somewhere in that range, it becomes far more financially wise to actually buy a house, have a mortgage, and pay that mortgage down. That's something you have to figure out on your own. It depends on the house too. Let's take that $100,000 house, for example. Well, what if you bought that $100,000 house, you're paying $1,000 a month, but here's one thing that was left out of that mix. The house is actually worth $200,000. Now you may say, well, that doesn't happen. Those houses would get bought up immediately. There are foreclosures all over the place that need some work. So yes, maybe you'd have to spend $5,000 or $10,000 to fix the house and get it up to a nice condition. But once that's done, you have tens of thousands of dollars in equity instantly. So you're paying $1,000 a month on a $200,000 house. You're paying a mortgage for $100,000 on a house worth $200,000. Now you may say, well, that's not an asset because it's not generating me income each and every month. That's not what an asset is. An asset should be something that appreciates. Now, houses generally appreciate, but do they appreciate more than inflation and the loss of the value of your currency? Probably not in many cases. So that's not necessarily the wise move. But if you can get in a house, and this is where the truisms fall apart, if you can get into a house that needs a little bit of work, fix it up, and have equity instantly, you have a completely different scenario where that house could be an asset, because then you could live there for a few years, move, sell the house, and while you didn't have money coming in each and every month from that, you essentially double your money. And actually what you can do, if you really want to start building wealth, is you can take that house that you have in a few years, instead of selling it, you hold on to it, you live there, and you take a loan out on a portion of your equity that you already have and buy another house and rent that out. Now this house that you're living in is paying for another asset that is bringing you in income each and every month. So yes, your house, that original house that you're paying and you have a mortgage for, that many people would say is a liability, not an asset, is paying for an asset that is paying you money. So directly, that house is bringing you income because you use the equity from that house to buy another asset. And also, this is another thing to mention about renting. If you were paying that $1,200, $1,300 a month for the same place, although obviously that wouldn't be the same place, because if the house is worth $200,000, it would have to be fixed up to be livable to be rented out. In that situation, you're going to be paying probably double that. So you'd be living in an actual $100,000 value house, paying $1,200. So you're living in less of a house, paying the same amount that you would for that better asset, and you have no equity. So at the end of your 2 years, you have nothing. You can't at the end of 2 years say, you know what, I'm going to use my equity in my house and buy another house and rent that out. You can't do that because you have nothing. You've literally wasted the money away. Now, like I said, if you're only planning on being there for a short period of time, renting is the wise move. There's almost no scenario where renting is not the best move in that situation. Unless you have a situation like that where you're able to get a good deal on a house. And sometimes bigger houses too are complexes. There's a little complex in my town. It's only about 4 units. So it's small, but it needs a little bit of work. It caught fire. It's not structurally damaged or anything. It just needs work. A lot of cosmetic work, really. Fix it up, live in one of the apartments, rent the other 3. You literally have an income producing asset from the start. And you have a tremendous amount of equity because you can get that for such a good deal. It was, last time I checked on this particular place, it was, I think, under 50% of the original value. Now, obviously, it needs some work. It probably needs a good 10-20% of its current value invested in cash to get it back up and get it to code so you can open it and rent it out again. But the point being, there are assets everywhere, and you may say, well, people will just buy that stuff up. This place has been sitting here for years. No one's bought it up. It's just sitting there. I know people like to talk about, well, all these deals, they just don't exist. There's no foreclosures. Now, you can go check the HUD Home Store, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Their foreclosures, it's hud.gov/HUD Homes or HUDHomestore.com. And check, and there are places all over the country for really good deals. Now, these you can't buy them as an investor, so these you need to be, I think many times you have to agree you're going to live in the home for 2 years. It may depend. You have to check and research that yourself. But many of these places are at a fraction of the price, and they don't necessarily need a ton of work. These aren't trashed out places. Some of them are, but many of them just need a little bit of work, just basic stuff, and they're ready to go. Many of them don't need any work. They're just ready to go. They're ready to move in right now. And they're being sold at a fraction of the price. And HUD has tremendous numbers of these available, but they release them at a staggered rate because they don't want to flood the market with a bunch of foreclosures, and then the price will drop on the value of all the houses across that particular region. So they stagger them out. So you can wait and check each month and see what new stuff comes out. You can also get realtors that deal with this. They can actually tell you and give you advice on what to do. Many of these you can bid on, so you can bid lower than what they're asking, and there may be zero competition, so you can actually get the house for less than what they're even asking. And that's an asset compared to renting. Even if you're only going to be in that area for a few years, you're only going to live in the house for a few years and then go buy another house and turn around and sell it, or turn around and rent it out. Now you may say, well, but it's not producing income each and every month. Yes, it's not. But it is an income producing asset whenever you get around to selling it or renting it out. And it's an equity producing asset, which the equity is as good as gold in many cases, because you can use that equity to buy more properties, more assets that will bring you income each and every month. So I want to stress, this is not against Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's a great book, and I think many of the points made there are very important for people to note, because many people aren't thinking anything about investment when they buy a house. They're just thinking about a place to live, buying this house, getting a mortgage. There's no real wisdom going into it. There's no financial research, really. It's just, do I want to live here? Can I afford this? That's it. And they've been told over the years, your house is your biggest asset. Well, it's not if your house has no equity. It's not going to have equity anytime soon. Your whole financial plan is that hoping that property value goes up. That's not a financial plan. Now, if you can get one, like I said about HUDHomestore.com, if you can get one of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's foreclosed houses for really cheap, where you have instant equity, you have something different there. That's an asset. No, it's not producing you monthly income or even yearly income, but you have something that, for those houses, here's something important to note. For some of these houses, now obviously it depends, and you're going to have to research and talk to a financial advisor and talk to realtors. Be smart about this. Don't just go blindly buy anything. But many of these places, you can buy them, and even, let's say the property value, the market just tanked. Worst case scenario, like 2007, 2008, where the market just tanked. If your house went down in value, what happened then? You still have equity. You're still ahead of the game. You still have a valuable asset that is ahead in equity because you got it for such a good deal. So don't overlook that kind of investment that's available everywhere. And if you do go into a house or a rental, whatever it may be, look to what is the best financial move for you. Many people aren't doing that. They fall in love with the house because of a pool, or they like where it is, or they like the schools. And then they turn off their brain in regards to financially looking at this is this the best financial move for me at the time? Is there a way of turning this into an asset? And I say, well, yes, it is best to have something that is producing you income each and every month. Equity should not be looked down upon. If you can increase equity or have instant equity, that in many cases should be looked at as the same thing as a monthly income coming in, because that equity can be used in ways to bring monthly income in. So I hope this has been useful for you. I just want to give you a different opinion, a different way of looking at it, because I hear people arguing from both sides. Well, no, renting's the best because here's why. And no, a home is a liability. It's never an asset unless you're renting it out. And really the truth is somewhere in between there, and it just depends too, because a home can obviously be a complete liability if it's a money pit, or if you got in at the top of the market and you have no equity and the market's going down and you can barely pay your bills and you have all these things breaking down. That's a disaster. And if you're going to only live there for a few years, then obviously in that situation, the home is nowhere near an asset. It's a liability, and a very costly one at that. So I hope this has given you some different things to think about and consider. You don't have to agree, it's all right, but at least consider, to think about things before you make a big financial decision. I pray it's been a blessing for you. May God bless you richly.